Good evening. I'm Rachel Weinstein, president of the Jewish Women's Foundation of New York. And on behalf of the entire board, I welcome you to our Bejeweled Gala celebration. It's hard to believe that this is actually our second virtual gala. Who could have imagined that over a year later, we'd still be meeting in this way? I know that many have categorized this past year as one of loss, limitations, division, and isolation. The challenges have been real, significant, and inescapable. But throughout it all, I have found the Jewish Women's Foundation of New York to be such a refuge in the storm. JWFNY is a place of possibility, of hope, of connection and community. It is a place where I can find inspiration, purpose, and fulfillment as a Jew, a feminist, and a social activist. At JWFNY, I have forged relationships with other committed philanthropists who share a vision of creating a more just and equitable world. Together, we invest in dynamic social entrepreneurs who have dedicated their lives to making meaningful systemic change. We call the women in our network our jewels, Jewish entrepreneurial women executives and leaders, and the moniker could not be more apt. They are strong in spirit and moral courage. They are valuable assets to our community, and their contributions to the social justice movement are priceless. As Rabbi Jonathan Sacks of blessed memory once said, there are some who say, if there's something wrong, let me be among the first to put it right. They are the leaders. They are the ones who make a difference in their lifetimes. They are the ones to make ours a better world. The jewels in JWFNY's network are exactly those kinds of leaders. Never have we needed their leadership and innovation more than we do right now. And later this evening, we look forward to announcing the incoming cohort of visionary leaders who will be participating in the Collective, our global incubator for Jewish women changemakers. But before we get there, we'll have the privilege of hearing from members of our current cohort about what inspires them, how they define leadership, and how they feel about their experience in the collective. We are also thrilled to welcome two very special guest speakers, Yolanda Savage-Narva, Director of Racial Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at Union for Reform Judaism, who will speak about her work to advance gender and racial equity in the Jewish community, and best-selling author Rebecca Traister, who will talk about moral passion and the power of women's collective anger. One tiny bit of housekeeping. So that you can see all of our speakers fully, please make sure your Zoom setting is set to gallery view. You can do this by clicking the view button in the upper right-hand corner of your screen and making sure that you've selected gallery view instead of active speaker. We have a full program, but before I turn over the screen, I'd like to extend a few special thank yous. First, to our Gala host committee. We are so grateful for your early commitments to support our event. Many thanks to our corporate sponsors, William Greenberg Desserts and Woody Creek Vodka, for their generous contributions to our celebration boxes. A huge thank you to our development chair, Maddie Adamson, for her tireless efforts on our fundraising initiatives, not only for this event, but all throughout this year. Of course, I also want to thank our very own in-house jewel, Jamie Allen Black, for her incredible vision and leadership, and our professional staff, Melissa, who planned this amazing evening, and Rachel, Natasha, and Emily, who make everything we do possible. They may be a small team, but they are mighty, and we are especially grateful for all of their hard work over this past unconventional and challenging year. I'd like to leave you with one more parting thought inspired again by the words of Rabbi Sacks. He said, optimism and hope are not the same. Optimism is the belief that the world is changing for the better. Hope is the belief that together we can make the world better. Optimism is a passive virtue, hope an active one. It needs no courage to be an optimist, but it takes a great deal of courage to hope. Tonight, I invite you to be hopeful with me, to imagine the possibilities that we can create together, and to have the courage to be an active part of the change. If you were inspired by what you see and hear, I hope you'll consider joining us. You can make a contribution by texting JWFNY to 44321 or by visiting our website. We will put the links in the chat. Every dollar that you donate this evening supports and elevates Jewish women social entrepreneurs and leaders. Thank you again for joining us to celebrate these amazing rock stars. And now, as promised, here are a few words from the current cohort about what inspires and drives them and how being part of the JWFNY collective has impacted their work.
There's inspiration everywhere these days, but in particular, I think we're in this wonderful, difficult moment of lots of different kinds of disruption.
I'm really inspired by the millions of people who are taking small and large risks every single day to create a more just world for all of us.
Social movements inspire me. The leaders who have been fighting on the front lines for justice for decades, folks like John Lewis, who just never gave up the fight.
I had noticed that everyone older in my family had blue numbers on their arm, but I had never, for whatever reason, thought to ask about it before that day. But that day I asked my great aunt why she had blue numbers on her arm. And all she told me was that when she was 18, bad men took her away, and they took her away because she was a Jew, and that they tattooed her arm. I just thought to myself, okay, I need to work to change the world so there won't be bad men.
The people that inspire me the most are the young people. And it really makes me proud, and it inspires me to see that those young people are following my lead.
I think a lot of it and my inspiration really comes from thinking about the women in my life and my grandmothers and my mother, and how they have what they fought for during their lives and what that meant in their lifetime.
I feel what inspires me is women around me and women in history.
To have a vision of a feminist world. And I really think that this quality to imagine something that we didn't see before is very, very inspiring.
The way I embody my leadership style is by doing what I did from day one, and that's really by listening first. It's listening to the people who are living the challenges and living the problems because they have the answers. They just need the help.
I think pretty early on, when I saw something that was unfair at school or in my home, I would definitely express my leadership by rallying others around me to speak up against whatever that perceived injustice was.
In Hebrew you say, צריך משוגעת אחת לדבר. You need like one crazy person to make a change. It's very helpful when you have sisterhood and you can collaborate and you have people around you to do things together.
I knew that I am here for a reason. I'm here to do something in my life to change people.
There's a lot of extra work that has to go into making sure voices that aren't centered by default can, in the ideal, take center stage, but in the very least, have a seat at the table. People coming together to tackle those problems. And unsurprisingly, in my experience, many of those people are women, and it's a beautiful thing to see.
There's always a place in which one needs to step back and create room for others and make sure that other voices are being heard, and that that is an equally powerful part of what it means to be a powerful leader.
I embody my leadership and I live it every day in my organization, in my block, in the world, in being a bridge builder between the Black community and the Jewish communities, because not everybody can do that. And that is it's a privilege to be the person who can bring the Black and the Jewish communities together. It's an amazing experience to be able to do that.
On this specific year, the collective was really a circle that you can find support professionally and also personally with people that have similar positions as myself, as the rest of us. And it was a place that I could find strength in and try to work together.
I feel that the strongest thing about the collective is the ability to meet other women, amazing women that do amazing work. And I feel that this ability to meet them and talk to them and learn from them is, for me, is the best gift.
Being a member of the collective is really powerful beyond measure. I can't underestimate the value that this experience has brought to my life and certainly will continue to bring to my life.
Being a member of the collective for the past year has been a great outlet for me. It has been a chance for me to learn from some exceptional women and to kind of see the direction that I'm going in a bit more clearly, and to really hone my skills and to really shape and form what I'm going to be doing in the future a bit better.
Especially in this moment, in the middle of a pandemic, when all of us are called on to be leaders in new ways and in different ways, it's really important for me to have a group of women who are in the same position that I am in, who I come together with on a monthly basis to talk about what's going on for us, to learn from each other. And it's really visionary on the part of the Jewish Women's Foundation.
I get so many tools and support from the cohort, how to make those transition and how to use my skill as a CEO, a former CEO, for the new position that I have.
And the leadership of the Jewish Women's Foundation of New York has allowed me to do something which is important for anything, which is to go back and realize that I need to trust my instinct on things. Trusting instinct of what else needs to happen in the ecosystem on women's rights is something that's giving me a lot to think about as being part of this cohort.
Seeing these examples in my midst on a regular basis and being able to learn from all these incredible humans is very, very special. I feel enormously grateful for the opportunity and the experience.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jamie Allen Black, the CEO of the Jewish Women's Foundation of New York. How amazing are those leaders? That's our second cohort. We're so inspired by them, and I hope that you all are as well, and that you'll get to know them a little bit better later on when you visit our website. I want to introduce today one of our board members, Rebecca Youngerman, who will be interviewing our guest, Rebecca Traister. Two Rebeccas, Becca and Becca. And I'm going to bring her to the screen. There she is. Hi, Becca. Almost. There you go.
Hi there.
Hi, welcome. They're going to take me off the screen and it's all yours.
Thanks so much, Jamie. And wow, that was an incredible video, an incredible opportunity to get a closer look at the women that we are so proud to be associated with. Thank you. Again, my name is Rebecca Youngerman, and I'm incredibly proud to be a board member of the Jewish Women's Foundation of New York. And it is exciting and thrilling to be here this evening with Rebecca Traister. Rebecca, thank you so much for being here. I just have to share, I was last in the room with you at the Tenement Museum, almost to the date 5 years ago, I think it was, talking about, listening to you talk about your book, All of the Single Ladies. So it is a delight to be back here today. Just briefly, Rebecca Traister has an incredible bio I'll take you through. She is a writer at large for New York Magazine and a contributing editor at Elle. a National Magazine Award finalist. She has written about women in politics, media, and entertainment from a feminist perspective for the New Republican Salon. And she's also contributed to The Nation, the New York Observer, the New York Times, the Washington Post, Vogue, Glamour, and Marie Claire. She is the author, as many of you know, of All the Single Ladies and the award-winning Big Girls Don't Cry. Good and Mad, which I hope you have all read or will enjoy reading, is Traister's most recent book, which was a New York Times bestseller about the transformative power of female anger and its ability to transcend in a political moment. And I really can't think of a more relevant person to be with us here this evening. So thank you. Rebecca, I want to start the conversation actually just anchoring in your own really powerful and I think beautiful words. And that is, quote, "The other side of anger is the hope. We wouldn't be angry if we didn't believe it could be better." So I can't help but saying, just history is being made all around us. And in this very moment, partisan politics aside, I think we can all agree that the visual last night of two strong, smart, and dare I say, perhaps a little bit angry women sitting behind President Biden last night was just an incredibly powerful symbol of what is possible when we really do cling to this hope that you've spoken about, Rebecca. So we're going to jump right into our conversation, and I'll invite everybody here just to throw questions in the chat directly to Melissa Rosen if you'd like to pose them, and we'll do our best to get to them. So as you know, Rebecca, we're here tonight celebrating our current collective of Jewish women entrepreneurs and inducting our incredible new cohort. Each of these extraordinary women is on a different journey in her path to changing the world, and we'd love to hear a little bit about your path. So here we are at the Jewish Women's Foundation. We'd love to hear how your identity as a Jewish woman has informed your work.
It's so wonderful to be here. Thank you for having me. So the question of my Jewish identity is pretty interesting because I was not raised observantly Jewish. I'm half Jewish. My dad's Jewish. My mom was a Baptist from a northern Maine potato farm, two very, very different backgrounds. My dad was like a Jew from the Bronx. I was not raised with religion, but I was raised, I look Jewish. And I was raised in a white collar Irish Italian neighborhood where I was the only Jewish kid in my elementary school. And so even though I was not raised religiously or to be observant, the notion of me as a Jew culturally in terms of my identity, how people perceived me actually was very real for me, even without the religious affiliation. And so I do think it sharpened in an early way some of my ideas about identity and assumptions that are made about identity. And it's been interesting to me because as an adult, I also, my husband is half Jewish. I live in a very mixed family world. And I remain not a religious person or an observant person, but in recent years, I have come to do some writing about Holocaust survivors that has led me to think more seriously in a professional way about Jewish identity and ways that religious identity plays into persecution and injustice and how it ties into so much of the rest of the work that I'm doing. So it's interesting. I would also say that youthful vision of myself as a Jewish woman in a not Jewish world, which was the one I grew up in, that shifted tremendously when I went to my high school which was predominantly Jewish. And I was the only person who didn't celebrate the high holidays. So I was sort of on both sides of that. And I definitely think that it informed my view of an interest in why cultural, religious, racial, ethnic differences can divide experiences and perspectives, and how those different identities are made to mean so much in terms of power hierarchies.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that. So thinking a little bit about today's political landscape, it's hard not to. We'd love to hear from your perspective, how does our society's constructs around strong leadership make life different, and maybe I could say harder, I think, for women, and especially I want to ask in terms of Black, Indigenous, and women of color.
Well, I mean, I think that one of the things that I've come to understand through my work is the way that we are built around white capitalist patriarchy in this country, right? It sounds, I mean, I think now people talk in those terms more. I realize that it sounds jargony, right? Like either activist jargon or academic jargon, but it's also just like what we've got as a descriptor of what how this country was built. And I mean that not just as jargon, but genuinely our laws, our constitution, our businesses, our courts, our economy was built on power, different kinds of, around a sense of who could have power, and that who could have what kinds of power: political power, economic power, social and sexual power, who could earn money, who had to be dependent on those who could earn money, who could vote, who had to be dependent on those who had the vote, who could lead, who had to be dependent on those who could lead, right? And all of those, over a period of now, 250 years, until extremely recently, the answer to those questions is white men, white wealthy men, right? And we, in the past 100 years, have done a lot of work through broad social movements and organizing to break up the kind of stranglehold that white men, and I would also argue, like a lot of economic injustice built around capitalist access, had a lot of the stranglehold. And of course, Jewish women did a huge amount of that work in the labor movement in the early 20th century and beyond. We've done a lot of work to break that up, but it doesn't mean that it's gone, right? We have an expectation often when we talk about fights for equality and justice, that those fights, especially if they're most energetic, when you feel like people are in the streets, when you feel like attention is being paid and you're like, we're going to change this. And there is this sort of sense, which I think you need moving forward, that when we say we're going to change it, we're going to change it overnight, right? You get this all the time around Me Too. Did we actually change anything with Me Too? And these are centuries long fights, And so over this past century, there have been all kinds of laws changed, practices changed, norms changed. As you said last night, you have for the first time 2 women sitting behind Joe Biden. Joe Biden is also the president. He beat out an incredibly diverse field of women for a lot of reasons. But I think we have to keep that in mind, right? They're still sitting behind him. They're not the one giving the speech. And so, and of course, those experiences, because they're both gendered and racial hierarchies and economic hierarchies, the experience of being marginalized is, multiplied many times over. White women, through their relationships to and the benefits that they enjoy via their proximity to white men, have enjoyed a lot of proximal power, even as they have also been, often abused and marginalized themselves within a patriarchal system. Black, Indigenous women, women of color, all have their experiences of marginalization along racial and ethnic lines. So yeah, and that means that it's, even as we've made the changes, you're still in a system that over centuries has been built around. So you can't just replace individual people and expect that those centuries of a system built around one vision of who could have power and who should have power and who must be dependent on those who have those kinds of power, that system isn't changing overnight. And so yes, it is certainly harder to come in from the margins to be at the center.
Thank you. I'm feeling the hope that you spoke about in addressing all of that and continuing to address all of that. So you have done something very powerful in reframing the way that we think about and interact with anger. Thank you for that. So we'd love to hear from you. What do you think is the true value of anger? And more personally, how do you channel your anger, and where has that taken you?
So
that you'd like to share with us.
So I want to say that there are a lot of different kinds of anger, right? And what Good and Mad is about in particular is anger at injustice. So it's the anger of the marginalized, the anger of those, in many cases, those on the lower end of power. Sometimes they can have power, but anger at the ways that power has been abused. There's also the anger of the powerful at any challenge to them. And so I don't want to make the argument that all anger produces great social change. A lot of anger produces the kind of insurrection we saw on January 6th. A lot of anger produces women standing outside of schools that have been ordered to be integrated and white women standing outside of them screaming. That's also anger. It's also women's anger, right? But it's anger at efforts to make the world a juster and more equal place, right? So anger operates in a lot of directions, but that the book that I wrote, Good and Mad, is mostly about the anger of those who have less power, and the way that it has been discouraged, that those with less power, those on the margins, have been discouraged from expressing their anger, and why. And my argument for why, that we're told, and again, this depends, the messages that women are sent about why their anger is bad and inappropriate shift depending on whether they are young or old, whether they're white, Black, Native, Latina, Asian. All these messages take their own shape and form, but we're told that to be angry is to be infantile, crazy, hysterical, funny, dangerous, threatening, ugly, unattractive, nobody wants to hear you, all those messages. And my argument in the book about why is because, in fact, if you look at the history of social change, at the big movements, and not just the ones we think of as traditionally women's movements, right? First and second wave feminism, but also at abolition, civil rights, labor, gay rights, environmental movements, they've often had angry women at their start. And so there's a reason our country was built around an angry, in a way that we're taught to revere, around an angry insurrection against a power system that was perceived as unjust, right? The guys who throw tea in the harbor are the stuff of our bedtime stories, right? We're taught to revere them. They're our founding fathers. We want to emulate them. Well, they were angry that they were being taxed and policed without representation in government. And they had a political temper tantrum about it, and it was part of the process that gave birth to this nation. Since the founding, since before the founding, there have been marginalized people who have been giving voice to exactly the same rhetoric. I tell the stories in my book about a woman named Mumbet who was enslaved in Massachusetts, who heard the rhetoric of the founding in her home, sued for her freedom, won her petition, and her case was one of 3 to be the basis for the abolition of slavery in Massachusetts in 1793. Abigail Adams was, even though all we ever hear about Abigail Adams as the proto-feminist voice is remember the ladies, in fact, in that same letter, she's writing in things we're never taught, because we're not taught about women's anger. She's describing that all men would be tyrants if they could, using the language of tyranny, which is the language of the revolution in King George, to describe gender inequality. The middle workers at Lowell, Massachusetts, who were some of the first in the country, young women to go out on strikes and form labor unions in the 1830s, used the language of the revolution. But this is history that we're not taught. I didn't learn about Mumbet until a few years ago, really, till I was in my 40s. We're not taught about Mumbet, even though her anger had political, legal consequences, the abolition of slavery in Massachusetts. We're not taught the other lines from Abigail Adams' letter. We're not taught a labor history that's about women, as so much of it was. We're taught about Teamsters and air traffic controllers and coal miners, largely male professions. So anyway, that's the anger that I'm working to unearth in that book and in a lot of my work, is the anger that we haven't been taught about as politically consequential, because I think it has been politically consequential, and I think that's why it's discouraged. And I'm in a very lucky position, which is that because I get to express my anger through my work, it doesn't disqualify me. I have a tremendous outlet for it. I get to write when I'm angry. And most people in most jobs, in most family situations, aren't rewarded. Most women who are angry at inequity and injustice and things that are simply maddeningly unfair aren't encouraged to open their mouths and yell about them. And I am. And that puts me in, I think, a far luckier and healthier position than so many. And I'm very aware of that I have a healthy and, in fact, remunerated channel for my anger. And that's an incredibly rare experience.
We are all better for it. Thank you. Looking out at this room of extraordinary people who represent all different, we saw the geographies at the beginning, who represent a variety of different life experiences and who come to the foundation from so many different places. We're hoping that you can share a piece of advice or a nugget that you were told along the way that has stuck with you. And similarly, if there's anything that you would like to impart on this room full of people who are already involved in making change and will certainly continue to do so after hearing your remarks and hearing from our Jules, we'd love to hear from you.
I wish I had some sort of pithy piece of advice besides like log off, which is the best piece of advice anybody could ever give. I mean, I'd just say log off. But the other thing is something I touched on a little earlier, which is about how long a lot of these fights, if we're to be invested in them, take. Because I think there is, especially, I write a lot in Good and Mad about people who come to political anger at injustice partway through their lives, right? Often privileged people who have been, who've been cushioned from it in some way and realize that how angry they are partway through. And often there's a great expectation that anger, especially when joined with others, we've seen a lot of this in the past few years where there's been such tremendous outpouring of anger. Certainly, Me Too, Black Lives Matter, the fury at the Kavanaugh hearings, the Women's March, mass protests. We've been in an era in which political outrage has had a tremendous impact on our politics. Waves of women being elected in 2018, record numbers of women being elected. That was because of anger, of the candidates and the people who worked for them and the people who voted for them. And there's an expectation that like when we all finally wake up to our anger, like it's, we'll win. And the fact is, it's one of the things that's been very hard for me to wrap my own head around in terms of talking to people and their experiences over these past few years, is that often we don't win. If everything were winnable when people got mad, we would be in a very different position. And that was, I found that especially true after the Kavanaugh confirmation, when so many people were just like, it didn't matter. Right. That's because actually anger at an unjust power system is an anger at a system that has power and the power to beat you more often than not. And so the piece of advice that I would give is to not back away, not let the fact that it's hard and that it often will be unsuccessful make you think anything other than that you should be staying in there with all of your energy. Because the fact is that there were generations of people who came before us who gave their entire lives to these fights for a better world and who died before they ever saw any victory. But the victories would never have been possible had they not given their entire lives. And so rather than letting the setbacks dissuade us or make us think that it's unwinnable, I would suggest that thinking of some of that history is crucial in remembering that the energy we put into fighting for a more just world is part of a long history of people who have given lifetimes to creating more just circumstances that we benefit from now, and that we're doing that whether or not we live to see the victories that we dream of. We're doing that for the generations that come after.
You're getting at where I was going to go next, and thinking about this intergenerational audience that we have here, even at the foundation, and what we're seeing, different experiences for younger people who are coming up, perhaps falling into these feelings and these experiences perhaps earlier in their journey than those who you referred to who come to it a little bit later in life. So I'll throw out, if you want to go a little bit deeper into the question I have here is, how have you experienced ramifications with any of the articles or the books that you have written in terms of how you've been outspoken in terms of social injustice?
It's interesting. When I was younger, I'm 40, I'll be 46 next week. So when I was in my 20s and early 30s and just beginning to write about from a feminist perspective, and interestingly, not with less of a platform and probably much less well at that time, right? In the early part of my career, where I was saying fairly banal, anodyne stuff. I mean, I got terrible pushback. I mean, the kind of scorching, it's a different time online. It was pre-Twitter, but in that early iteration of the ability for people to respond to somebody online, yeah, threats and nastiness and all kinds of denigration and just constant denigration. a lot of it at that time gendered, and aesthetic and sexualized, and as I've gotten older, that has fallen off for me tremendously. And I mention that because I do think that that itself is a lesson about power, right? I have become actually more powerful as I've gotten older and more senior in my career. And so I'm targeted less. And I think that's one thing that's important as we grow older. I think about this a lot in terms of Me Too, and some of the generational differences that you see. It's easy for us to forget the inequities that we experienced in our youth, right? Or to write them off as rites of passage or something that we have to tough our way through. I think about this kind of stuff all the time. I am treated so differently, even professionally, when we talk about sort of professionally abusive behavior within offices and workplaces. I am treated so much better now than I was as a young worker, right? And it's so easy. And I think often when you hear when you hear conversations about this, so and so is accused of behaving badly. Well, he's never behaved that badly with me, he's always been wonderful to me. You always have to think about how power plays into that, right? And you always have to think about the fact that the person who's treating you well as a colleague or a peer may not be treating the person who's getting them coffee or making them copies or doing a lot of the meat of their work, but unrecognized and underpaid. They might not be treating that person well. And so that's one lesson about sort of aging and power that also ties into the, I don't get the kind of abuse I got when I was in my 20s. I do as I write more seriously about politics, and I think better about politics than I did when I was younger. When I do get stuff, it is, and this was not true when I was young, it is almost always violently anti-Semitic. Even though as a person who's not observant and not deeply religious, I don't write about being Jewish, but I'm on all the lists of the people who are in the media who are Jewish. I get the horrible anti-Semitic caricatures and swastikas on postcards until I finally figured out how to try to scrub my contact information from the web. But now that's what characterizes what I do get is very often violently and aggressively anti-Semitic.
Wow. Well, I want to end very, very briefly on a note of hope where we started, and just to ask you, what gives you hope when you wake up in the morning?
Oh, the amount in the world that's different. The change is that, I mean, it depends on what kind of mood I'm in the morning, because look, this glass half full, glass half empty applies every day in everything about us, right? And there are moments that I feel nothing but crushing defeat, the impossibility of it all. How are we going to fix it? We have a clock on us right now, the planet. And the sort of, when you do the kind of work I do, and that lots of other journalists are doing, whether it's about violent gender inequity, violent racism, and how it marks everyday life in this country for millions of people, it's hard to sometimes find the hope because you're like, I'm writing this story again. We know it when we see another story about another young person killed by police, about another woman who's been raped by a celebrated man. Like, it happens again and again and again. But that's a terrible answer when you say, give us some hope. Those are the bad mornings when I wake up. But the terrain that I cover, I mean, it helps to have that long view, right? To understand that this has been going on for generations, for centuries, because the shift in whose voices are being heard, whose voices are, even if it's too rarely, being taken seriously, the shifts in how we understand power and power abuse, the shift in how we conceive of what politics means. Does it come from the top down or does it come from the grassroots, right? Those are structural questions that are beginning to change in a way that I've never seen before in my lifetime. And I think haven't happened this broadly very much in American history. And it is possible to see those shifts without being too rosy about it, without saying, oh, it's all better now, and that the two women behind Joe Biden are the answer. They're not, right? They're not. They're not even, they're not, they're the tip of an iceberg, right? And it's not just about the inclusion of individuals. It's about shifting how systems work and our perception of how power is supposed to work. How power is supposed to work historically has been abusively. How power could work. How power could work. What could comprise change? What could we do with moral, ethical, political, and economic power? How could we make people's lives better? And that is a project that is shifting in front of our eyes. It will never be fast enough. It will never be fast enough, but it is shifting. And we can't let the days where you think it's another death, it's another assault, we can't let those days take us from the task of trying to reimagine how we could provide better for more people, more dignity, more thriving, more justice, more resources for more people. We can do it. It is possible to change ourselves, but we have to throw ourselves into it. And the bad days are the things that keep us from doing that. And the good days are the days you're like, no, you just keep going. You just keep going.
Thank you, Rebecca. You are extraordinary, and we are all so grateful and really better in this fight because of your thought leadership and because of your writing. And you keep us energized. So thank you so much for joining us. This was inspiring, and we all wish we had so much more time. We're so grateful that you joined us. I'd like to turn the program back to Jamie, and thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Becca and Rebecca. I could have listened to them for hours. You know, I really got in touch with my own anger when the Jewish community began its reckoning with gender harassment and abuse, coupled with my very first political march ever in January of 2017. And talking about power is one of my favorite topics. So I think we're going to do that in just a moment. I want to introduce you to Yolanda Savage-Narva, who leads the racial equity, diversity, and inclusion work for the Union for Reform Judaism. Her bio is going to be in the chat for you to look at it. I really want to get into the conversation with Yolanda. So welcome, Yolanda.
Thank you so much, Jamie. It is really a pleasure and honor to be here with you today and share this space and community with you.
Well, we're grateful to have you here with us. And as usual, we have a lot to get to and never enough time. So I hope this is our first public conversation and not our last, but let's get into it. Tell me about you, your work, what you hope to accomplish, what you see as challenges to that, and I don't know, anything else you want to share?
Wonderful. Well, my work is my life. And I say that meaning that it's hard to really separate what I do from the life that I live, and the life that my loved ones around me live as well. So just professionally, I'm the Director of Racial Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion for the Union for Reform Judaism, which is really focused on creating this environment of transformation around diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And when I think about transformation, that means really pushing in a direction where you're not just doing DEI, you are DEI. The lens of everything that you're thinking about has a centering of racial equity, diversity, and inclusion. And so that's a really important part of what I do. And, you know, I like to really frame why I do this work using the Marshall Gantz storytelling narrative that talks about the story of self, the story of us, and the story of now. And so the story of self is really basically being called to do this work by my parents, instilling specific values in me around three things. Number one, making sure that I understand that every single person in this world has a story. And it's really important to understand that everyone is coming to the table with a story or an experience that informs how they navigate the world. The second piece is really thinking about four things: what inspires me, what motivates me, what challenges me, and what sustains me. And so a big part of my work is wrapped up into those four areas. And then, of course, there's the story of us. Who is us? You know, us as women, Black women, Jewish people. And it ultimately ends up connecting to the story of humanity because we all have that connection with one another. And then the third piece is really this story of now, what's happening around us now. And so if we just take a look around, I could talk about what's happening around us for the next 5 hours. But the top of the list is really addressing the systemic racism that's happening in this country, the continued killing of Black and Brown people, really looking at the environmental impacts of what we are all faced with at this point. And then the third piece is really stepping back and understanding how to make sure we all hold ourselves accountable for having some role in dismantling these systems and making things better for everyone. And so those are my goals. I mean, really helping everyone figure out how they connect to this system and using kind of this mirrors or windows analogy where we stop, we understand that we individually play a role, and then we collectively play a role. And I think when we do that, we work together better, and we can find strategies and solutions to how we can manage and navigate the world that we're living in.
Well, that's a lot. But I think there's so many pieces of that I think are really important. And one of them that really stuck out to me was, well, two things. One is that my work is my life, which also like it's really hard for me to separate like where I'm thinking about gender equity and social change and where I'm not. Like even when I watch TV, that's what I'm thinking about. So it's right. It's really hard when I watch TV and I think, why are there so many white people in Seattle in 2021 in that show I'm watching? Where's everybody else? And so I'm wondering, and you and I discussed this, like what is it that individuals can do? Like I'm not asking you to tell us how to fix ourselves, all of ourselves, because that would be like crazy of me to say something like that. But I am thinking about how individuals, how not-for-profits, how philanthropists, how Jewish community professionals, how synagogue members, like what is it that we can do to create or help create social justice in a meaningful way?
Yeah, in a meaningful way. And I think you really, you hit something there, because I think that there are a lot of transactional things that people can do. And not to say that they don't have an entry point, that's an entry point for some people, and that's okay. But then we have to think about what's next, what's happening for our future generations. And that's the transformational piece. And the transformational piece is a deeper dive into ourselves and making sure that we can hold the mirror up and say, I recognize that the past 400 years of history in this country has dictated a white dominant culture. And because I live in that culture and in that system, then I automatically have, at a minimum, implicit biases and unconscious bias, but also racism as well. And stepping back and owning that and making sure that you view that in a way that it's not a character flaw or that you're a bad person, but it is part of this, it's part of it. And so I think that's really important to recognize. And I think the second piece is being proximate, really taking the time to get to know people who are different from who you are, because it's really challenging. It's really hard to put someone in a box and stereotype them if you know them. And when you get to know people, you get to know who they are, why they do what they do, a little bit about that story, and that humanizes us all. So that's an important piece of that as well. And then, this is going to be a deeper dive and maybe harder for people to hear. But if you really are truly dedicated and committed to this work, you have to realize that the playing field is not equitable. We talk about equality versus equity. And so the equity piece means that there are times when there's not going to be equal distribution of resources, for example, and that equity is going to potentially require people who have more systemically over time to give something up. And, I had a slide I wanted to show actually, and it's a cute cartoon. It says, who wants change? And everyone's hand is up. But then the second question says, who wants to change? And not so many, not so many. So that's something to think about. I'm going to wet my face because I am sweating. It is pretty warm up here where I am. Okay, there we go.
Air conditioning on over here, so.
I think we may need to use it here too. Oh my goodness. Okay.
I think that it is confronting. I know a lot of people who have said to me, wait, they don't really mean I have to give up my job for a woman or for a person of color. They don't really mean that. I'm like, yeah, that's what we mean. Like, that is what we're talking about, is that we, in order to move forward, people are going to have to step aside to make room for other people to move forward. And people don't want to do that.
No.
I'd rather work in my organization to embed, which I think is important, to embed, racial justice principles and anti-racist principles. Like, I would rather do that. Isn't that enough? It's not enough.
It's not enough. And it does, unfortunately, it doesn't scratch the surface. And it honestly goes back to that transactional piece. Like, that's transactional. Transformative is a different thing. And transformative means that you got to put some sweat equity into this. And, you may have to give something up in order to fill the bucket of those in this country whose buckets are pretty empty and always have been, for many years. And so in order to really have true equity, the water has to come from somewhere.
And yet it's not a zero-sum game, right? Like, there is enough opportunity in theory for everyone. It's that the power struggles, the caste, for lack of a better term, structures in our country, right? Those are the things that are clogging the pipeline and the opportunity for people to really live in their own power.
That's exactly right. And Jamie, part of that, and you mentioned caste, and I've been talking about caste a lot because it helps me to kind of articulate what we're up against with a little bit more clarity. And so the way the caste system is set up and designed, this hierarchy, is that those who are at the top of the hierarchy, who are in the power structures, the white, male, cisgendered person who is at the top of that hierarchy, doesn't want to lose that position. That, there's power with that. There's resources with that. There's and with that. And then the people who are at the bottom of that hierarchy are Black and brown people. And then there are, entry points throughout the hierarchy. And so when you step back and think about it in those terms, and we talk about giving something up, people are thinking, wait, I'm here. I have power. I have authority. I have resources. Do I need to give something up in order for those who are at the bottom of that hierarchy to have some equilibrium around just existing in this country?
And historically, that has been the case, right? Even when the Jews came over, before and after World War II, when it was like, who can be, if the Irish are at the bottom, then if the Jews come over, they'll be at the bottom and the Irish will be up a step. But then we'll bring the Black people over and then they'll be in the bottom and the Jews will be up a step. And it's always kind of like pitting the bottom 5 layers against each other as if that's where the problem is. And that's not where the problem is. The problem is in the top layers not willing to make room.
Exactly. And the sad part about it is that those who are in those bottom layers of the hierarchy are fighting also to gain position, to get above one or the other, so that my group is not at the bottom of it. And so you have people assuming these roles who are oppressed, and then the oppressors are continuously assuming the roles. And you see this kind of vicious cycle happening over and over again.
Right. So one thing I want to say, a couple of things. One is, people, we're going to go over a little bit. So I hope you'll stay with us. And that's just how it's going to be tonight. We almost always end exactly on time, but Okay, I'm playing the CEO card. Is that what that's called? So that's what I'm doing.
Jamie.
Second, I don't want to go to the last question without acknowledging that yesterday was Yolanda's birthday and today is her anniversary. So thank you for sharing your anniversary with us and your post-birthday. So I wanted to say that. And now I'm thinking about, do you really think that we can move the needle on this in our lifetime? It feels so intractable to me sometimes.
It does, Jamie. And I've been thinking a lot about this, and I've been thinking a lot about time, because if we think about time in Judaism, it looks at time in several different ways: the past, the present, and the future. It looks at time from birth and life and death. If you go into Kabbalah, it talks about breath, wind, and spirit, and repose. So there are these kind of pillars of time that I think is really interesting when you're thinking about how do we actually implement something and move it forward where it's actually going to make a difference and actually move the needle. And I've been thinking about it with the thoughts in mind that we are actually in a time and space where we can make a difference, but we have to think about time differently. I think that oftentimes we live in the right now. We think about what's happening right now, and not that that's not important, it is important. But I think if we think in terms of how do we get to the future that we want to have, and what does it take in order to make those steps there, that is what is inspiring and motivating me to keep moving. Because if I just look around at right now, I would just say, oh my goodness, I don't know if this is actually achievable. But if I think about my descendants and the descendants who will inherit this earth, hopefully if we get this climate thing under control, for those who are going to inherit this earth, what am I doing right now that's going to set that stage and foundation for them in the future? And that's what keeps me going. When I wake up in the morning, I say, okay, I will likely not see this in my lifetime, but my ancestors, are there. My descendants are waiting, and we have to put all the effort we can to make sure that this world in 40, 50 years looks much different than it does now.
So let me ask you this. Would you be willing, there's a call in the chat for a conversation about reparations. Yes. And I know that there's a lot of misunderstanding out there about reparations and what that means and how it would work and how we can, advocate for it, or why we might not want like all that. Would you be willing to come back another time and have that conversation with us?
I would love to, and I have to say, in a week, I can send this to you, Jamie, if you want to send it out. I am having a conversation around reparations with an expert in reparations from Howard University here in Washington, D.C. to talk about the foundation of reparations and what it really means. It's a 3-part series, actually. The second part is going to talk about the history around the Jewish connection to reparations. And then there's a third series that's going to talk a little bit about what reparations mean today. We have HR 40 that was just passed in the House, I guess, a week or two ago at this point, to just look at the study of reparations and whether or not that's, I don't want to get into political stuff. It will likely not move further than that, but it's the first time it has passed the House in 30 years. So the conversation is definitely worth having, and I would come back. Yes.
Great. And send me that link, because that could be a nice prep for our people, for people who are listening in to listen to that before we have that conversation later on. So thank you. Thank you so much. We promised that we would have a transparent conversation.
We did.
And I think it's these transparent conversations, it seems like we only get to like the very beginning, and then we have to stop. And I don't want to just let it go. I want to make sure that we share that link to the Howard University series. My godson goes there, plug for my godson in Howard University. And I think that this is just super important for us to think about. There's a lot of terminology that I think is misunderstood. And I really, really thank you for being here, for sharing your time, your anniversary. And
it's my pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope you'll stick around. Everyone, thanks. Round of applause for Yolanda. And we're going to announce the cohort 3. So I hope everyone will stick around while we do that right now. Here we go. Thank you, Yolanda. The 10 women in the 3rd cohort of the collective are all exceptional leaders. After a rigorous vetting and interview process by JWFNY's visionary philanthropists and activists, these women were selected from a pool of more than 300 social entrepreneurs who lead organizations that create social and economic change in a broad range of populations and geographies. I think you're going to be really excited to meet them. So here we go. It is my honor and privilege to share the 3rd cohort of the Jewish Women's Foundation of New York visionary leaders. Shlomit Bukhaya, Executive Director of the Association of Ethiopian Jews, based in Ramla, Israel. Shlomit arrived in Israel from Ethiopia at the age of 5. She's an attorney activist leading and building an organization addressing systemic and cultural discrimination and racism in Israel, while she's also working to improve educational, social, and economic opportunities for Ethiopian Israelis. Shlomit says, I believe strongly in professional integrity, holding oneself to high moral principles and a strong work ethic. Karen Grossman Gershon, Executive Director of Project Kesher, is based in New York. Karen leads an effort to advance civil society in Belarus, Russia, Ukraine, and Russian-speaking communities in Israel by empowering women leaders, supporting intergenerational Jewish life, advancing gender equity, and promoting public health and wellness. Karen says opportunities are unlimited when people begin to realize that ideas and power are also unlimited. Shoshana Keats Jaskal is co-founder and director of Chokmat Nashim, based in Beit Shemesh, Israel. Shoshana, a writer and activist, elevates the voices of religious women and their advocates in Israel to counter the rise of religious extremism and growing erasure of women in the Orthodox community. In Shoshana's future vision, women are present, seen, heard, and celebrated. Sarah Levin is the executive director of Jemena, Jews indigenous to the Middle East and North Africa. Based in San Francisco, Sarah leads domestic and international efforts to end the marginalization of Mizrahi and Sephardic Jews with roots in the Middle East and North Africa, and pursues acknowledgement, justice, and redress for these members of the Jewish community. Sarah shared, I have found that my leadership has always blossomed when I create a vision that I am determined to turn into reality. Dr. Ana Lucia Lopez Reveredo is the founder and executive director of Jutina Eco, also based in San Francisco. A Peruvian, Chilean, Quechua American Jutina and anti-oppression activist, Ana Lucia raises awareness of Latin Jewish heritage, multiculturalism, and intersectional justice, and she gives Latin Jews from around the world a channel through which to engage in critical dialogue and develop community leadership skills. To Ana Lucia, there is no separating her gender identity from her leadership. To quote her, it shapes my perseverance, collaborative nature, and desire to fuel the growth of others. Elizabeth Mandel founded and is the executive director of J Girls Magazine. Elizabeth, based in New York, is an accomplished documentary filmmaker, writer, editor, and community activist. She is cultivating the next generation of bold, committed Jewish female leaders by giving teens a platform to cultivate, amplify, and share their voices with the world and each other. Using this online magazine, she envisions a world in which girls and women are empowered to use their voices with confidence and skill. Shahana McKinney Balden is the founding executive director of EDOT Midwest Regional Jewish Diversity and Racial Justice Collaborative in Madison, Wisconsin. Shahana, a longtime educator and Jewish diversity advocate, works to ameliorate the effects of contemporary American racism on Jewish community life in the Midwest by increasing access for Jewish people of color, growing Jewish diversity work, and developing and centering the leadership of Jews of color. Shahana's leadership vision is to build confidence in herself and the team at EDOT Midwest to let mistakes happen and then transform those mistakes into learnings. Co-founder and executive director of the Mosaic Project, Lara Mendel, based in Oakland, California, is committed to cross-cultural communication and the power of diversity. Lara brings together students from markedly different communities to address issues of difference, build self-esteem, inspire acceptance and inclusion, and create equitable learning communities. Lara says, "My main role in the organization is to share the vision of a more inclusive, peaceful, just world, and to inspire others to work toward creating that world." Rabbi Jenny Rosen, founder and CEO of Dayenu, a Jewish call to climate action, is a social change and justice advocate based in New York City. She leads a national organization mobilizing the American Jewish community to confront the climate crisis with spiritual audacity, bold political action, and a religious and moral voice. Jenny says, "My leadership is rooted in a sense of calling and my belief that I must use all of my talents and abilities to bring about a new world." Esti Shushan is the founder and CEO of Nivcharot in Petach Tikva, Israel. An ultra-Orthodox lecturer, media personality, writer, and activist, Esti founded the first Haredi, ultra-Orthodox, feminist organization in Israel to advance the status and rights of ultra-Orthodox women and the inclusion of their voices in the political process. Esti shares her vision for leadership. "My vision is for our daughters and their daughters to grow in a Haredi society set on the values of righteousness, equality, and respect." We are thrilled to welcome these 10 Jewish women social entrepreneurs making impact across multiple continents and within diverse communities. Welcome to the collective. We're all clapping for you. So thrilled to have you here. We are missing Esti because she's in Israel and it's probably, 4 in the morning there or something. So you will all represent, Shlomit would know because she is in Israel. Thank you all for being here. I can't wait to dig in with all of you. So the women chosen for the collective participate in a 3-year process to support their visionary leadership. The cohort is about the leader, how she sees a problem and identifies a solution, and how she partners with others to ensure social change. We provide unrestricted grants to support her organization and generous funding for her professional development. I am extremely grateful to have the opportunity to create and facilitate the curriculum with the inimitable Ruth Messenger and my JWFNY colleague, Rachel Siegel, our Director of Strategic Programs. Mark my words, these women will run our communities, our governments, and eventually the world. I also want to acknowledge the members of the first and second cohorts of the collective, many of whom are with us this evening, and some of whom you met in a video earlier. All of them are featured on our website, so seriously, go check it out, jewishwomen.org. It couldn't be simpler. Go read about them. Each woman is as impressive as the next. Where other organizations may have contracted operations due to the pandemic, we've been growing to meet the ever-expanding needs. We can't do this without the generosity of our loyal supporters. So to those of you who have already contributed, I offer a most heartfelt thanks. For those of you who would like to donate now for the first time or again, please text JWFNY to 44321 or visit jewishwomen.org/donate. The links are in the chat. On the precipice of our 25th anniversary, we are poised to grow the impact of our program. Every single dollar raised tonight goes directly to support the Jewish women leaders in our network. There are now 30 of those women. Our goal is to raise an additional $25,000 tonight, so please, please, please consider helping us to reach that goal so we can have greater impact and reach more women. Thank you again to Yolanda, Savage-Narva, and Rebecca Traister, such inspiring women. We can't wait to see what they do next. And of course, to both of you, welcome to the JWFNY family. Mark your calendars for June 3rd from 12 to 1 p.m. as we continue Eastern Time, as we continue our monthly Crown Jewel conversations. In June, we'll highlight Rabbi Jill Jacobs of Trua. You will not want to miss what Jill has to say. Feel free to continue texting your donations and be sure to check your email inboxes tomorrow for a virtual swag bag and invitation to the conversations. This concludes our gala program. Thank you all for staying extra for those who could. And for those members of the host committee who have purchased tables, we invite you and your guests to your private breakout room. So please click the accept button when the invitation pops up on your screen. For everyone else, thank you so much for being here and celebrating these incredible women with us. I raise my glass to all of you. Cheers.